Today, we're going to learn what Joseph's story can teach us about adversity. We continue this fall through our journey through the Old Testament. In fact, we're really still in the book of Genesis. Last week, we moved out of what are mythological stories and we moved into history with the story of Abraham and Sarah. You remember that? If you didn't, you can watch that on our website. And they taught us about the obedience of following your calling. So this week, we come into another ancient Jewish story, and it's the story of Joseph. Just to place you in where this is landing, Abraham has Isaac as a son. Isaac has Jacob. To make it even more confusing, Jacob's name changes to Israel, if you recognize that name. And Israel has 12 sons, and the youngest is, his young one is Jacob, who, is Joseph, who we'll be talking about today. So each of these families have fascinating stories, and I know that this congregation, unlike almost any other congregation, you're all going to go home tonight like you did last week and read the stories from Genesis that we didn't cover in the readings this week because you're so curious and the stories are so fascinating. But your reward for attending today is that you're going to get a quick overview on the story of Joseph's life, much of which is not in the readings because we'd still be doing the readings just to catch up. So that's the good news. Next time you're at a party and someone says to you, that question we always get asked, what exactly was Joseph in the Old Testament? You will be ready to answer that question. And more importantly, today you're going to get some concrete tips for dealing with adversity in your life. So Joseph, one of Jacob / Israel's 12 sons, father loves him more than any of the others. He gives him a colored cloak as a sign that he was the favorite. And of course, the cloak probably cost more money. It was expensive and precious. And then Joseph has these dreams, and he interprets them to mean that his brothers and his family will one day bow down to him. And Joseph was a dreamer. Today, we might call Joseph an intuitive or a mystic. He had a vision of the future. Now, because of our mystical bent here at Church of the Holy City, we attract an unusual number of mystics. People confess to me they see visions of the future or speak to the dead or keep a dream journal. Joseph would fit in well here. But many mystics tell me also that their life is not easy, particularly those who can see things that other people can't. Like Joseph, very, very, very few people understand them. And boy, did his brothers misunderstand him in that story. And as Ross kind of implied in the way he read it, maybe it's not the smartest to share a dream with your brothers who are already jealous of you that someday you're going to rule over them. So these lovely brothers of his come up with a plot, and they are going to kill him. They're so jealous. And that is one of the dangers of jealousy. Whenever you're feeling jealousy, be careful. You're giving into the hells, and it can turn nasty quick. So they're going to kill him, and they change their mind after throwing him into a hole for a while, and they sell him. They sell him off as a slave. And poor Joseph, he's just a sweet young 17-year-old, is sold into slavery. He's taken to Egypt, which is far away. It's the big kingdom in those days. And somehow he finds his way as a steward, a servant, slave, in the house of Potiphar, who was one of the Pharaoh's top officials. And as a slave in this very prominent house, Potiphar's wife actually seduces Joseph. So the Bible has some pretty risque stories. And he refuses to have sex with her, and she screams out that he's assaulted her. So poor Joseph, just being a good guy, betrayed by his brothers, ends up in prison in Egypt for not giving in to Potiphar's wife. So while he's in prison, he meets a couple leaders of pharaohs in prison, a butler and a cook, and they have dreams, and he's the mystic, so he interprets their dreams. And the one he says is going to be killed, the other one's going to be freed. The dreams come true. So that's Joseph in prison. Meanwhile, Pharaoh is having very bad dreams, and he's very worried, and all of his spiritual advisors can't interpret them. And the one prisoner who was freed is in Pharaoh's inner circle. He says there was a guy in prison named Joseph who can interpret dreams. Maybe he can help. So Joseph is called out of prison to interpret the dream, and he predicts a famine is coming, and he has a strategy for preparing for it. And Pharaoh, the leader of Egypt, agrees to it, says, makes sense to him, and he says, let's make Joseph a senior advisor to Pharaoh. So Joseph goes from prisoner to being a leader in Egypt. So as the family hits and the brothers, his brothers and father and family back in Israel, they have to make a trip to Egypt just to get food. They're all starving. Joseph recognizes them, and after a bit of tormenting, he eventually forgives his brothers and he's reunited with his family, and we have a very happy ending. And this story is so captivating that it was actually made into a modern day Broadway hit, Joseph and his Technicolor Dreamcoat. So if you get nothing out of the sermon today, you now know the story of Joseph, and it's an amazing story, and the Bible is full of these great stories. So when I read the story, what's so striking to me, and the thoughts I want to share with you today, is that Joseph faces adversity in his life really through no fault of his own. Maybe he shouldn't have shared that dream, or but he gets bad things happen to him, and he's not a bad guy, it seems. And that happens to us in our own life. We all face adversity. Bad things happen to us. Most of us are not bad people. We're not trying to do bad things, but bad things happen. And we want to look at this story and see, is there anything that we can learn from Joseph about adversity? And first, I want to, what is there any purpose in adversity in our life? So in our Swedenborgian tradition, we think there is. Adversity in our tradition is necessary for your soul to develop. In other words, it's like going to the gym. It's physically working out your soul. It means you've got to overcome things. You're going to have temptations. You're going to have challenges. If you remember in the story of Jesus in the New Testament, Jesus even has to go through these temptations in the desert. So all of us have to go through this adversity. That's how we grow. And he also says that evils in our life, evil things and evils that are going on in the world, we need to become aware of them to address them. And that also can feel painful. Very often we like to hide evil, but bringing it into the light, we can deal with it. And that's a lot of times what happens during adversity. We see things for what they really are, and then we can deal with it. And then the third is really what was in the reading today, which is that God uses this adversity and works to bring about good if we're on a spiritual path. So it can seem like this just seems like a disaster, but God is working in our life, much like the song that we heard earlier at the beginning of the service. God knows better than I. So adversity serves a spiritual purpose in our lives for growth. So let me say that again. Adversity serves a spiritual purpose in our lives for growth. Now, what kind of pastor would I be if someone came to me for counseling and said, Pastor, my mom is dying of a terminal disease, and I answer, great news. What an incredible growth opportunity for you. Not very sensitive. But there is something about our ability to reframe what appears to be very bad news. And when we can do that, we can create resilience in our life as adversity hits us. So are there any strategies that we can take very practically that will help us face adversity? One simple thing that you can do when you're facing adversity is ask this question. Is there any way that good can come from this? And just ponder that question and pray with that question. Another good question in a time of adversity is there something that I can learn from this? And that's an ability to reframe the situation within ourselves, and it shifts the way we look at adversity. And adversity can come to look like an opportunity. When Annabelle's friend, Panyong Son Yim, I'm sure I didn't pronounce it right, but I apologize. But if you remember, he's the leading Buddhist monk of South Korea, a Zen master, and he's an activist. He came to Church of the Holy City twice, and he came most recently and he and I answered spiritual questions from the audience. And he was very direct. And afterwards, some people said, well, he was just very direct with some of the questions. He didn't seem particularly empathetic in some cases. And the reason why I think people didn't get what he was saying in some cases, they felt it was very direct, is that he's really approaching it from a Buddhist perspective. And the way Buddhism looks at adversity is, I think, very enlightening for us. It's very similar to the way we would want to look at it. In those question and answers that he answered, he told people to look at the crisis they were facing as an opportunity. In other words, the bad names that you give to events are your way of creating your own suffering. Stop seeing it as bad, and you'll stop the suffering. In Buddhism, it's unrealistic to hope for a stress-free life, and that would not be good in any case. It makes more sense to learn how to deal with stress, and inevitably, because it will arise. This aligns nicely with Swedenborg's teachings. Now, a wonderful story that encapsulates this Buddhist understanding about reframing adversity is just really, we don't know when we see something bad happen, whether it's good luck or bad luck. Let me share the story of the old Zen farmer. Every day, this farmer used his horse to help work his fields and keep his family and farm healthy. But one day, the horse ran away. All the villagers came by and said, "Oh, we're so sorry to hear about it. This is such bad luck." But the farmer responded, "Bad luck? Good luck? Who knows?" So the villagers were confused, but they decided to ignore him. A few weeks went by, and one afternoon, while the farmer was working outside, he looked up and saw his horse running toward him, but the horse was not alone. The horse was returning to him with a whole herd of horses. So now the farmer had 10 horses to help him with his fields. And the villagers came by to congratulate the farmer and said, "Wow, that's such great luck." But the farmer responded, "Good luck? Bad luck? Who knows?" A few weeks later, the farmer's son came to visit and help his father work on the farm. While trying to tame one of the horses, the farmer's son fell and he broke his leg. And the villagers came by to commiserate and said, "Oh, how awful. This is such bad luck." And just as he did the first time, the farmer responded, "Bad luck? Good luck? Who knows?" A month later, the farmer's son was still recovering. He wasn't able to walk or do any manual labor to help his father around the farm. A regiment of the army came marching through town, conscripting every able-bodied young man to join them. When the regiment came to the farmer's house, he saw the young man with his broken leg, and they marched right past him, and they left him where he laid. Of course, the villagers came and said, "Amazing! This is such good luck. You are so fortunate." And, well, you know how the farmer responded by now. Good luck? Bad luck? Who knows? The great point of the story is that we can see in events and we try to make sense of them, but we don't often see the bigger picture. Only in hindsight can we see God's plan. Only looking back can we see in Joseph's adversity in that story, and there's a lot of adversity, but all those events lead him to save his people from starvation. The coach and author and teacher named Byron Katie has a program called The Work. And after she was suffering from addiction and depression, she had an epiphany in one of the programs that she attended. And I think what she's come up with is quite brilliant, and it's worth delving into further, even after the service today. Don't look now. I discovered, she says, "I discovered that when I believed my thoughts, I suffered. But when I didn't believe them, I didn't suffer. And that this is true for every human being. Freedom is as simple as that. Suffering is optional. I find joy within me that has never disappeared, not for a single moment." So she developed 4 questions that you can ask yourself when you're facing adversity. And I'm going to share them with you now. The first question when you're facing adversity, or you've got a conflict or a problem in your life, right? The first question is it true? Are you sure it's true? Second question is Can you absolutely know that it's true? Third question is, how do you react to what happens when you believe that thought? And the fourth question is, who would you be without the thought? Then she asks you to turn around the problem you stated in a positive way. So it's a very interesting way to reframe your mind. It's a very simple 4 steps that we can use. I want to run it by Joseph right now. If we could put Joseph through these 4 steps, how would he respond to these questions? Well, the first one we might say, Joseph, what's the conflict? He said, well, my brothers have sold me into slavery and nothing could be worse. I've been betrayed. My life is over. And we ask him, well, is it true? He answers, as most of us will do whenever we are asked that first question. Oh my gosh, for God's sakes, I'm sitting in a hole and my brothers want to kill me. Yes, it's true. So now we ask the second question. Do you know it's true? And here Joseph might answer, well, I can't imagine being thrown in a hole could be a good thing, that they're threatening with death. They want to sell me as a slave, but I don't know for sure. I don't know for sure what's true. Then we ask the third question. So what happens when you believe that thought? And Joseph responds, well, I go into despair. I feel lost. I want to die. And then we ask them the fourth question. Who would you be without this thought? Joseph might answer, I'd be a seer of great things. I'd be Jacob's favorite son with a vision of greatness. So try turning the original thought around to its opposite. He might say, my brothers want to sell me into slavery, but God has a plan for me and has given me a powerful vision of my life. This looks bad now, but with my trust in God, this event will change my life and the life of the entire world for the better. This exercise teaches us that we can think of adversity and what appears to be disaster, and it can actually be a breakthrough in ways that we can't see. I know in my own life, if I think maybe the most stressful time that I've shared many times, but it would probably be the time when I was coming out, I would say that was my time probably of worst adversity that I could imagine. Now, in retrospect, this many years later, it's hard for me to imagine what was so scary about it. It's really been one of my greatest gifts. So can you think of a time in your life, it just seemed to be the end of the world, and that in that moment, you couldn't see a way out, but then it flipped and you realized it was actually an incredible opportunity. Good came from it. I encourage you to remind yourself of this. This is a good way for us to manage adversity. In Joseph's case, we know that if he had not been sold, if he had not made his way to Egypt, if he had not gone to prison, and if he had not interpreted the dream, the whole ancient world would have starved to death. But seeking the good, even in times of adversity, and reframing our mindset shift can make us more resilient, like Joseph. And as our song today taught us, we can simply say to God, you know better than I. Amen.